Brenda Adelman, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to dive in with you and learn about your story. I'm wearing a spiritual gangster shirt because just hearing a little bit about your story has made me get prepared for today. I already know you're a spiritual gangster. You have done amazing things with your story, and you do something that I teach my students, which I know you also teach your students, which is you created art from pain and
Yep.
challenging moments. So tell me, when did you know that you were an artist? How old were you when you figured that out?
Well, as a little girl, my mom used to take me to Broadway shows, and she used to take me like backstage to the back door to meet, like, I mean, literally, I started going when I was like 3 years old, and I saw greats like Carol Channing and Ethel Merman and like these big divas, and they were so funny. And I do remember also seeing Fiddler on the Roof, and I remember being so mesmerized and then going to the back door and seeing that one of the teenage daughters was like a 30-year-old woman and being like, oh my God, the stage is so magical. You can be any age and anyone. Um, and my mom signed me up for some tap dancing and singing school in Manhattan when I was little. She dropped my friend and I off and go, and it was such an adventure. We performed in Carnegie Recital Hall at like 10 years old, singing and dancing, and so that was really magical. My mother really just was so different. She was an artist. She was a painter and a photographer, and so I just was exposed to the theater. And then in high school, I think like many girls, I kind of lost my power and got really shy. So I stayed in production and, stage crew and stuff like that, and bands, but I always really loved acting so much. And then it was in my right after college. So I was studying productions too in college. And then in college, I went to Vienna. My brother was he running? Oh, well, he had written and directed a play, and so I stayed on to assist stage manage that. And then there were some openings, and so I started acting, and I was bitten by the bug. So when I went back to New York City, I got into Meisner training, and I just realized, oh my God, I can express my emotions, because growing up in Brooklyn, talking about spiritual gangster, it was like, oh no, you got to be tough. And then here I was on stage expressing everything, and it was such a freedom. I just loved it so much. And then um, it's a funny story that when the story that we're going to talk about today with forgiveness, um, when I developed a one-woman show based on my life story, it was in that moment that I realized everything had prepared me for that. Like being an actress had prepared me to be able to channel my feelings and even get into healing, because playing the characters of my story, being the biggest enemy, my father, if I'm playing him as a character, because I play like 12 characters in my show, I can't play him as a villain. He can't be one-sided. People don't play themselves as villains. And so that was another level of healing for me, jumping into his character. So what happened is that, like I told you before, I grew up in Brooklyn with a Jewish wannabe Italian father who taught me how to drive a Cadillac at 6 and how to shoot a gun at 10. A bohemian artist mom that took me traveling with her all over the world and read Shakespeare to me from the time I was 3 years old as a bedtime story. And it was lots of love, lots of passion, also lots of fighting and lots of hating on each other between my parents. And then in 1995, my father shot and killed my mother, and then within a month moved in with my aunt and then married her. And tying in entertainment and drama and all that, it was my mother read Shakespeare to me from the time I was 3 years old. And so when this happened in my life, and then my father moved in with and then married my aunt, and I felt so alone, I realized that Shakespeare's character of Hamlet lived through something like I did, his father being killed by his uncle and then his uncle marrying his mother. And so when I couldn't speak because I felt so damaged, it was that full circle moment of, I knew someone in history must have experienced what I did, and that made me feel better. And it's part of the reason I share so openly about my story. And of course, in Hamlet, it's about death and destruction and revenge, but my life story, my life's work since then has been about the power of forgiveness.
Beautiful. You speak so beautifully. It's like each answer is a speech. I love it. You're prepared. So let's go back a little bit. So you moved out of you were very there for your parents. You're an only child?
I have an older brother.
Okay.
We have different fathers, but
Okay.
we were brought up like we were just brother and sister. He's 5 years older than me.
And you move out, I think you said at 30, and you say, I'm going to LA and I'm going to, revitalize my dream of being an actor.
Yeah, I fell in love, and it just so happened he lived in LA and I was an actor. So I'm like, yes, how amazing. Yeah.
And you move there to be with this fiance.
Yeah.
And what happens? You come home from this beautiful day in LA, being an actor, taking classes on how to get into show business more. And what happens?
Yeah, and the irony of the timing. So the first like 10 months I was there, I was working in retail in Manhattan. I was working on Fifth Avenue, and I was like, oh good, I'm leaving. I'm getting out of there and just going after my dream. And then as soon as I moved to LA, they had an opening. They needed another manager at the store there. And they're like, come in. And I'm like, okay. So I was back to doing the retail, but I was in, a theater company. And that was the weekend. And I'm like, that's it. I am going after my dream. I can do it. I took this workshop where I'm like, how do I get my career going in LA? And I get home, and my fiance tells me that he got a call from my father. My father said there was an accident and my mother's dead. And I just remember, collapsing to the floor. I had just seen my parents 2 weeks before. They were in LA visiting me, and I just spoken to them on Wednesday of that week, and called my father, and the police answered, and they told me I couldn't talk to him, that they were questioning him on the lawn. And then I flew back to New York the next day.
Wow. And what was your first thought? Did you think that there was an accident? Did you think it was premeditated? Because you said your dad was sort of like a wannabe Italian mafia gangster. So these are your words.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Honestly, the first thought I had was he did it. But then I covered it up, partly because guns were always a part of my family. And when I was around 15 or something, one of the 3 times they separated, my mother said he put a gun to her head. And when they got back together, I thought she must be lying, because why would you go back to someone who did that? But I remember that because, you hear something like that when you're a kid, it's not like it ever leaves you. And my father, there were other clues, only in hindsight, because you don't believe something like that is going to happen, but there were clues, and their guns were a big part of the house. Of course we thought they were toys. We would go target shooting, they were toys until they weren't.
Yeah. Does this is a side note, but does this make you sort of anti-gun or more pro? What does your experience make?
I'm not anti-gun. I'm anti-mental illness. Someone with mental illness having a gun.
For sure.
But how do you check that? My father was a very successful businessman, but, was that one registered? Maybe, I don't know. When we would go target shooting, I was a teenager going into places that, didn't check anything. Yeah.
And so it takes about a year for your dad to get into jail. And where are you mentally during this time? Are you, even though I can't imagine you being pleased about it, were you a little bit relieved that he was finally getting his quote unquote comeuppance? Or
I was completely in despair and depressed, and I loved him so much. I wasn't even in shock. I wasn't even in a state of, oh good, he's going to prison. I think I was more I didn't even know about the death penalty. I didn't know anything. Like, I was not aware of anything. So I didn't knew that wasn't a possibility. Like, I just remember thinking I wouldn't want anything terrible to happen to my father. And I hated him for what he did so much. So it wasn't pleasant to be in my head. And that's where a lot of my writing came from, though. Once I finally took all the thoughts in my head of, I hate him, I love him, I hate him, I love him, how could he do this? I just want my father back. Why can't I get an answer? You know, I took all that writing. And when I started writing it onto the pages of my journal during my sleepless night is when my healing started.
Beautiful. And so it takes about a year for your dad to go to jail. You said that you went through this period of just like writing to him over and over again. Did you do it? Did you not? Tell me the story. Even if you're not going to tell the courts the truth, I want to hear it. And you sort of, what goes through your head? It sounds like you started to see maybe he does suffer from, psychopathic issues or narcissistic.
I don't think I realized that yet. I didn't know about it enough because I was still pleading and talking to him as if he thinks like me. You know what I'm saying? What I realized
we treat other people the way that we want to be treated, that we think we are, that they are.
Right. And he just didn't, like, only in my study of narcissism. And I know people don't like labels, but if you actually study and understand the tendencies or understand what a sociopath is, or he didn't have the empathy. He didn't have the reason to tell me anything because he couldn't feel my pain or really even understand it. And I also I definitely understand in hindsight, why would he tell me? It's not like anything he could have told me would have been good. But but it was only when I realized he was a narcissist that I was free. I didn't have to any longer be like, but can't you see how important this is for me to have closure? But I did write him over and over, and he'd write me back and be like, bet you look beautiful. How's your life? And I'd be like, tell me what happened, and he'd ignore it. And then, a year after, it was just so much pain for me because I'd have this hope, like he's going to tell me the truth. And then it would be this superficial letter back that I said, don't write me back unless you answer my questions. And I really, really, like, the inner child in me was like, he's going to write me back. It's going to be okay. I can't have my mother back, but he's going to tell me. And instead he stopped writing. And that was really devastating. And then it's my one-woman show, which is called My Brooklyn Hamlet, a Meshuggah true story. It's a very New York story, but then I have like 5 soliloquies from Hamlet when the emotions are too much. And that's one of them. Like, when he doesn't write me back, I'm so devastated because I think he's going to give me the answer I need, that I have, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed its cannon against self-slaughter.
I love that you become so Shakespearean when you say it. It's so cool to hear a Brooklyn girl say Shakespeare. And I'm just really impressed. Like, you're talking about this like you're telling a crazy story that happened in Brooklyn once. You seem so not removed from it, but like you've done so much inner work on it, because I know what it's like to do a one-woman show about your past and heal from it. And I got to a point after I did Barb so many times that I couldn't do it anymore.
What's your show?
It's called Finding Barb. It was actually a 2-person 4-puppet musical about my life.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really cute. You can find it on YouTube. It's hidden.
I will watch it.
And we went on tour with it, and it was mounted in LA a few times. And, it was an off-Broadway show, and it was amazing until it was I couldn't do it anymore. I did it so much that it hurt when I would do it. And I've learned so much about releasing the past that I just can't do it anymore. I do have a screenplay of it, and I would love to make it into a movie. I shot a trailer for it that's like 25 scenes long, and I'm still pitching it to this day. But and I think eventually it'll be made. But
it's a process. It's a process I teach to my storytelling students, because the very first time I put my show up, it was before I got my master's in spiritual psychology, and that program completely shifted my life. I did it because I had to tell my story. People would laugh and people would cry because I'm a comedian and I'm an actor. And then I would go home and be absolutely devastated and like, what the hell am I doing?
Right.
And so I took time off after that first production, finished my master's in spiritual psychology. At the same time, the ending of what I love about the one-person show format, or the show format, is that you can write things into existence. So that the ending of the first show was, will I ever be able to love and trust again? And I swear it's like I wrote it into my life, because I was, and then I created a family, and then I was able to trust again. But I took, I finished my master's program, took a few years off, rewrote like the ending of my life, took my dad to court, and then the show came back to me and I wrote it again, and it was more powerful. And then I've done 20 years now of inner work. Like, not only do I have the master's in spiritual psychology, I went to shamans, I went to healers, I went to therapy, I went to acupuncture. Like, I did everything I could to feel better and to find joy again. And I was doing this show. It is like the gift that keeps on giving, because if it's based on your life, but I had to figure out a way for it to be like uplifting, not just for the audience, and fully uplifting for the audience at the end, but also for myself. And I remember there's so many layers of it. And this is what I teach my storytellers, because otherwise you will be like, I can't do this anymore. What am I doing? I was doing the show in Sedona, working with this director, and she kept giving me the note right before we're opening of louder in the beginning, louder. And I'm a trained actor. I know how to breathe with my diaphragm, and I just couldn't do it. And then she said to me, I think it's your inner child, because the first part of your show is really quiet, and that's when you'd have a voice. And so, knowing the work that I do, I was backstage and I'm like, okay, talking to my inner child. I'm like, we're going to have fun. We're going to have a place for you to play and for you to share and for you to have your voice. And it significantly changed the experience of my show. After that, it was like that part of me was healed and integrated. And then I also learned another layer of it was that that it's a give and take with the audience. I'm not just giving, so I'm not depleted. So it's really a building up, and then to be completely honest with my feelings. So like that very first time I did the show, before I did all the inner work, I would reveal that I was so depressed, I wanted to kill myself. But I wouldn't want to really go there, because I wanted to take care of the audience and make them laugh in the next moment. And of course, that keeps me stuck in them. So now I take them where they need to go, because people are sitting in that audience having been through those things. And so by going that deep, but I'm healed, I'm healthy, I know it's 2020 or 2019, I'm doing this, I'm taking them there, and then I'm giving the experience of coming to the other side. And like, I have a very powerful forgiveness ceremony that I do on stage as well, so that when I do the show, I do it consciously. And I always set an intention. Can I learn something more about my family tonight? So that it's fresh. But I have had times where it can be work. Like if you're doing 5 days a week, it's work. It's like, I love to do this, and it's work where I'll then take time off, for a few years. But then because it's my life story, which maybe you'll do too, like, because
Sure.
it's your life story, and you help people, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Then give it, when you're ready, you make sure you're completely strong, and then you give it as a gift again to people,
For sure. No, I think I've always wanted it to be cinematic. So I think that's the next step for it. But I do
Yeah.
cabaret shows all the time, and in my home on Zoom and Instagram and Facebook Live. And
Is it storytelling too? Are you
yeah,
like
for
including
sure.
your story?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I also am a comedian, but I love cabaret because I can do impressions. I can sing silly songs.
And you're an amazing singer. That's what I heard. I'm like, oh my God.
Thank you. I love singing because for me, so much gets packed into the lyrics and the music and the rhythm. And so I love just being able to do everything. I found stand-up, I don't know if you felt this way too, since you're also a writer of, bigger productions, that I felt that it was too limiting. It was like,
Oh yeah.
funny, 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 stop, funny, funny, funny. And it was too much
Right.
for me. Like I wanted to be able to cry and make people laugh and laugh myself, and, tell a really important piece of wisdom, and have the audience with me the whole time, as opposed to just trying to make them laugh all the time. It was too much.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I took a stand-up class in LA, and I did some stand-up because I wanted to see how to bring humor to my story. But the funny part is I couldn't in that context of that format. I did something else about my sexuality instead. But it
Oh
helped
boy.
inform it, it helped inform me You know, and there's definitely a place to write jokes within material, but like you, I want like my humor is ironic. Like I have a lot of humor, but it's not in the show. It's, I mean, here and there, there's a line, but it's more like, think about this. Here you go, you know? And then I have to give the audience permission to laugh. Like it's okay, you know, you've healed something when they can laugh. But yeah, cabaret sounds wonderful, you know,
It
that's
is
so wonderful.
wonderful. It's a beautiful art form that I hope continues after we get to be live performance again. And it's something that when people would come to see me for the first time, they'd never been to cabaret before, they'd say, "This is so cool. Like I want to do this again." And I always feel that cabaret is sort of like the church of Broadway, where it's like so
Oh,
intimate. You strip away all the great costumes and all the sets and all the lighting,
mhm,
and you literally
yeah,
sit in the dark with somebody else and they hold your hand and they take you on a journey and you cry. Everybody cries in cabaret, unless it's like,
yeah,
something so over the top. There's a lot of great drag queens in cabaret.
right.
I guess you even said before, you don't know for certain, but you feel like,
I'm pretty sure. Sure.
okay.
If he didn't hold the trigger, he hired the person, you know, or something.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's so hard to talk
Yeah.
about this. Like, I feel like I'm asking you questions like, did you order the turkey or the tuna? But you're dealing with it so well that it's like, because I know my listeners are gonna be like, but wait, what's the
No,
story? How did
no.
this
So
happen?
let me just say, I have been speaking on this since I've been teaching. I've been coaching on forgiveness since 2005. I've been speaking, doing keynotes, doing my show, doing talkbacks since 2005 too, around there. And I've spoken to women prisoners, youth at risk, domestic violence coalition. So yes, so you're speaking. I believe me, if there was something that was inappropriate, I'd be like, the reason I have done such deep work is because I want to be able to answer questions. I want to be able to not be triggered when someone says something, because I do know, like I was in an audience, I was performing one time and I did a talk back afterwards, and I had literally just changed a couple of lines in my show where I added that I needed to forgive my mother too. Like it was always just my father, but it was part of my healing. And this woman raises her hand. She's like, "Why would you have to forgive your mother?" And I said exactly that. I said, I had to forgive her for the model she set for me of how it's okay to be mistreated by someone who says they love you. And you could just see, you know, here's the thing, you get to know people, like you could just see on her face that victim mentality, victim
Yeah,
bully. And if you live in that, you're going to live a life where you don't have as much joy as you could. So
100%.
yeah,
But I think you were forgiving at least three people, and if you will, four entities. Number one, you're forgiving your father for, like you just said, you believe that he is to blame for the actual death of your
yeah,
mother, which is horrific.
yeah,
You're forgiving your mother for, as you said, knowingly going back to someone who told you that that person held a gun to her head 3 times. And then you have to forgive yourself because clearly you were enmeshed with them for 30 some odd years, if not more so, even if by the way, the phone, and you leave. And what is it? 10 months later, this happens. I'm sure that came up for you. I
oh
was
yeah,
at unconscious guilt
guilt,
for
yep,
leaving, right? And then the fourth entity is God,
yeah,
because whether you want to call it God or not, but this
yeah,
divine power that created all of you,
mm-hmm,
how could God, he, she, it, whatever you want to call it, the force, put these two people together, create someone as magical and beautiful as you, only to want kind of want to hate everybody? So how did you find the strength and the courage to forgive all of these entities as you
yeah,
grew, as you became conscious of?
yeah. And you're just so right on the money. It shows where your consciousness is. Because I have a course called Phoenix Rising. The first week is forgiving yourself. Second week is forgiving your mother. Third week is forgiving your father. And the fourth week is forgiving God. Um, let's see. I could not, and I say this, I could not forgive my father until I forgive myself. It's like, or I could only forgive him to the level that I could forgive myself. I kind of feel like that's like love. You can only love someone as much as you love yourself. And
Ah,
so I
beautiful statement. So true.
I did the forgiveness of the way I was taught, it was like forgiving the judgments of ourselves or the judgments we hold in ourselves. So I forgave myself for judging myself as trusting my father. You know, like I thought I should have seen something, I should have saved someone. I forgave myself for not, I forgave myself for not catching it sooner. Like I had to do all this. I forgave myself for loving my father and then realizing, of course, I'd love him. He's my father. And I had a really good relationship with my father because I don't know if people know about narcissists, but when you're with one, if you're the apple of their eye, they elevate you, they make you feel amazing. So the
Oh yeah.
good part is that I didn't, the good part is that I had that when I was growing up. So I had this innate feeling of self-love that a lot of people that didn't have something as traumatic happen to them, they don't have that inner knowing that they're lovable. So I chose not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I didn't say, well, none of that was true. Like someone else might be like, well, he didn't really love me. And I was like, you know, I learned to embrace that love that was there and not throw all of that away. So but I also think it was really hard to do any forgiveness until like the full level of forgiveness. Well, there are two things. One is I had to embrace my anger. I kept trying to just bypass it, you know, because we're taught you have to forgive, but people don't really tell you how to do it or why you should do it. And then growing up, you know, being a nice girl, and then you have, you know, you're supposed to not be like that towards your parents. So I actually think it was, and it's in the first step of my forgiveness process. Now I have a book, I have a Kindle book with my 3-step process because um, I feel like I stayed as depressed as I did because I did not embrace my anger. I kept just kind of compartmentalizing. So what I would say with anger, healthy release of anger would be either going to a therapist, going to an anger person, or like for me, a lot of free form writing, which is just like writing everything out on the pages of my journal without thinking, and then lighting it on fire. So I never rereading it because otherwise that anchors the energy back in. It was really important. And I was in the master's program, so I would have to do these processes for like 30 days at a time. So I probably did 3 to 6 months of it, but that's really effective. Like writing, but not indulging, not staying in the story, like with the intention of, okay, I'm going to let something go today. I think sometimes people stay in the anger instead of have that next step, which is you must let it go and you must not reread it and stay in it. That really helps me release it. And then the other thing was taking him to court, like actually knowing what a healthy boundary was the other thing that helped me. And I did that from a place of self-honor, not hatred. So those were the things that helped me forgive. And then with God, I think how I was able to forgive God, actually, I had a direct experience with God. I didn't really have a relationship with God when I was growing up. We weren't religious, even though we were Jewish.
And you lived in Brooklyn, so you're
And
surrounded.
I lived yeah, but you know, partly, you know, the temple wouldn't let me go because my parents weren't married by a rabbi because my mom didn't have a Jewish divorce. So you know what I'm saying? Like that was not smart for them. But anyway, I had a direct experience, literally not being able to sleep at night. I just had, I would hear something. I was mixed up. Was it God? Was it my mother? I wasn't sure because I was so close with my mother. I felt her presence the moment she was gone. And I just, all of a sudden, I started listening and kind of having a white light that I would see, and everything would start to feel peaceful and calm. So I had this experience with God for quite a while. And then as far as intellectually forgiving God, I think what I learned and what really resonated for me was that I chose my parents. Like I choose to make it that I made this choice. It's not like life has happened to me, that this is all some divine play. And what are the good things that I could learn? Well, I learned passion. I learned creativity. I learned different things from them. So, and I choose to believe that everything happens for a reason because that makes me not a victim to it. So those are the kind of
You are
things.
so strong. Like, I'm just sitting here intellectually listening. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That's logical. And then my heart starts to open because I'm an empathetic person. And I think anyone else who had these circumstances happen to them would not be a functional human being. Like I had a
Right.
guy on, he's my first guest, Azim Kamisa. Please listen to the episode. He's
Oh, I know him.
okay.
I've worked on it. I mean, I've went to
Great.
on a panel with
So,
him.
I mean, he forgave the murderer of his 20-year-old son. And the reason I
Yeah.
chose him to be our first guest is because I never thought there'd be anything more devastating to forgive until I heard your story. They're both, you can't really compare devastation. It's just not. It's like saying, what's
Oh
worse,
yeah, but
someone coming out of
yeah,
the
no,
Holocaust or a little kid that grows up in Nigeria that has no food? It's like they're both
right.
horrific situations. But I just hearing you share, it's like you have done so much work. You have like a gold medal in forgiveness. And I want to circle back to something you just said. When I created this podcast, it wasn't to just get everybody to forgive no matter what. I do believe in forgiveness, and I struggled with anger for a really long time towards people who hurt me, and certain things that were sort of taken away from me as a child that I really suffered from a long time. And so when I found forgiveness and I realized how simple it wasn't easy, but it was simple to let go. I thought, if there's one thing I want to teach the whole wide world, this is it. And so it was like, duh, let's make a podcast about it. I also have no problem literally walking up to anybody and asking them the deepest questions about their life. It's just who I am. It's not to get fame or fortune or to be cool. I
No,
literally
I'm exactly like you.
I know.
Because of what we lived through, and then you're a creative on top of it. That's why when I watched that podcast, I'm like, oh my God. And then I watched some of your stuff. I'm like, oh my God, she's also so much like me. Yeah.
Very much, very similar soul. We're probably from the same soul group, but I just love people and I find people fascinating, and especially stories like this where you come out of the most horrific of events and you're just, I wouldn't say unscathed because that's not fair. I would say you've turned it into wisdom. You took the charcoal
Yeah.
and you made it into a diamond. And I want to really highlight with my highlighter what you just said, which is you can't just forgive because it's the right thing to do or it's the logical thing to do healing wise. You have to do the work. You have to embrace the anger, channel it, do something with it, because I don't want people to listen to this and say, oh, there she goes again. Or, another episode about how someone, forgave this awful thing. It's not just forgiveness. It's literally sitting through the pain, figuring out what the wisdom is, just like you did, finding the beauty in both of your parents, seeing them as 3D or 5D individuals that gave you so much. And also, it sounds like we haven't gotten there yet, but sort of owning that your soul was on this very advanced level to experience these circumstances. I mean, clearly you were chosen to grow through them. And the other thing I want to say is that your story of not being able to sleep and hearing a voice reminds me a little bit of King David, who we know wrote all the Psalms, right? Tehillim in Hebrew. So, there's over 100 of these little poems, if you will, and they're all really beautiful. And some of them are just jarring, the way that he talks about his feelings and how people are coming after him. And yes, he did live through some wars and people were trying to kill him. But if you actually listen or dig deep into the words of them, I took a class on him and I was really relieved to find out that not all of the things that he wrote about happened to him. They actually were, he supposedly had like bipolar disorder or something of, I mean, I don't even know if I believe in these terms anymore, whatever. He would be like up and down. You can see it through the pages, right? And he would run to the window in the middle of the night, couldn't sleep. He'd open up the window and stick his head out, pray to God, and you can call it ghosts, demons, spirits of people who had passed on would kind of jump inside of him, and he would feel their feelings and all of their words, and then he would write them down. And when I wrote my children's book for adults, and then One Day the World Coughed, I know I've talked about it so much on the podcast, but that's exactly what happened to me. I was having a really hard time sleeping during the second week of the pandemic. And I usually don't have sleep issues. I thank God. Like I have a nighttime routine, I meditate, but I jumped out of bed and I said, God, why am I not being able to sleep? Like because it was so hard to be in New York at the
Oh, I
time.
couldn't sleep in the beginning either. Oh my God.
I mean, who could, especially for those of us who have that empathetic ability. I was feeling the world, right? And I was feeling what's my responsibility as an educator, as an artist? How do I reflect how to get through this? Because we have an obligation to use this brain, to overcome everything. And so, because that's all we can do, right? Herman Wouk, like, they can take away anything from us except this, like our brain. We have to be able to use it for good. So I said, God, what's going on here? And then in 45 minutes, all the pages were written. And it's this like beautiful story about like the blessings of COVID. So I'm not here to toot my own horn. I'm really just fascinated by how you let yourself get in touch with your
Well, I
anger.
want to say something on that.
Please.
I want to say something on that. So at the same time, but this is when my mom died, I couldn't sleep. And when I changed from thinking things in my head to writing them down, I wrote 100 poems in 30 days. I'd never written poems before. And then one of those poems became the first scene for my one-person show. So it was very much channeled like that.
That's amazing. So what would you like the entire world to know? If anyone has ever been through a situation where let's break down all the things that happened to you. Your parents had a horrific marriage. That sounds like there was domestic abuse and violence since you were little. There were always guns in the house. Your dad was a sociopath, sounds like a narcissist. Your mom gets killed, most likely by your father, and your dad leaves, is able to only go to jail for 2.5 years, and then marries your mom's sister. And then you don't ever see him or your aunt again. And you have to reconcile all of this. If anyone listening has had even a portion of one of those things happen to them, what would you tell them? What is your advice for them?
Well, definitely, I would say you're stronger than you think. I would say you have an opportunity to flood yourself with self-love, that you don't need anything from a parent or anyone who has hurt you, that if you continue to search for something from them, and I'm sorry, or anything, you're setting yourself up to be dependent on them. And your good comes from within yourself, from your connection to spirit, God, to surround yourself by people with a high vibe that are not victims to life. But there's a place to be a victim, like get it out, get that anger out, get everything out in a healthy way, and then move on, or else it will leak out into the rest of your life and the rest of your relationships. And ultimately, it's about self-love, and that forgiveness obviously is for the person doing it. You never have to see the person again. I forgave my father and I took him to court for wrongful death, and I never saw him again. It's forgiveness is like a quality of sweetness that takes over the part of your heart that's been closed with unforgiveness.
Oh, I love that.
My book is called My Father Killed My Mother and Married My Aunt, Forgiving the Unforgivable. It has a 3-step forgiveness process. I don't know if you even see it the right way, but if people want, it's a Kindle book, but if people want it, so it's a part memoir, has my story, and then it's part forgiveness workbook. If your listeners want it, I don't have the link. I can send you the link, or they can message me and say that they listened to your show, and I'll give them a digital copy for free.
Oh my gosh, that's so nice. Okay, yeah, please. What is the link? Or well, I'll put it in the show notes. But
because I don't have the link right now.
What's your email if they want to write to you?
Brenda@forgivenessandfreedom.com.
Forgivenessandfreedom.com. Well, there you go, guys. Brenda, it's such a pleasure to know you and hear your story.
Pleasure.
I really thought I was gonna like be whipping out the tissues and crying, but I have to say, no, it's okay. I'm so elated and impressed by how strong and fervently joyful you are. I really thought it was going to be a sad day. In a good way, like a good healing cry.
Yeah.
but it's the
Yeah.
opposite. It's like, it's healing to have so much joy. Thanks for coming, Brenda.